Hello everyone, our group is AutoGrader and our team is comprised of Jonathan Rogers, Owen True, and me, David Manchie. For our problem description, our problem is homework takes a long time to grade, especially the tedium. People can make mistakes when they grade, and we want to alleviate that by automatically doing so. So the goal is to create a system that automatically grades papers, and breaking that down, that involves recognizing both the handwritten words along with recognizing the actual text, and then also determining the quality of the solution. In this case, we're doing math as an example for equality, but also determining the correctness of the solution. And so the importance of this work is that it will significantly reduce how long it takes and how difficult it is to grade assignments for teachers. Fortunately for us, this is not an entirely unexplored field. So one of the very helpful resources for feature extraction when we attempted that was David Slate's letter recognition database. And David Slate originally created this in 1990 for recognizing the actual printed text. And this specific database is trained on 20 different fonts randomly distorted into 20,000 different training points, each with 16 attributes from different characters. For precedent in other people doing this, we had resources like Bags, which was created by Beijing Boxfish Education Technology in conjunction with Tsinghua University, where they attempted to automatically grade from smartphone pictures. And that also kind of rings a bell with a certain app called Photomath, which is the if you've ever looked on the App Store and seen that app where you can basically take a picture of a math problem and it'll tell you step by step how to solve it. In 2014, that app was released with specifically scanning from text and wasn't given the ability to scan from actual handwriting until 2016, which, to the next point, handwriting is sort of a different problem here. And the MNIST database, which is a database of different handwriting, was very helpful for that. But the Photomath software uses OCR, and so this isn't really a related work so much as an entire field of study for optical character recognition. And this was, fundamental for our project and really helped us actually recognizing the different sentences and different characters we had to recognize in that sense. And then natural language processing, also related field. We tried to use ChatGPT on this to sort of test as a demo. We understand that the actual meat and potatoes of this project is in the image recognition of finding those characters, but we did look into the natural language processing side of things. And I put related function on this slide as a sort of note that OCR, optical character recognition, but OCR is literally a MATLAB function in the toolbox, so that was very helpful to our program. So our solution follows this general game plan of attempting to extract all the words within the document by finding each word and then locating each specific letter within the word, classifying each specific letter within the word, reconstructing the word as an actual value, and then separating questions from responses so that we can actually grade it. That one is sort of the reach goal, but being able to classify each letter and reconstruct the text into something that a natural language processor could actually read, that would be the main goal of our solution. So we touched on this a little bit previously for OCR specifically, but the first step of this solution is extracting all the words within the document. So we have our document and we run it through the optical character recognition, the OCR function, to identify the actual words in this photograph. And so you can see sort of an example here of it locating bounding boxes for each of these words and then zooming in, and then it will actually classify and return a text value for what each of those says. The second part here, we have to identify the letters within the word. And so we tried two different methods. We began with connected component analysis, CCA, on this inverted image where, as we talked about in class, the black text on white background is an inverse of a pixel map, but the CCA identifies and groups pixels together that belong to a region or an object, or in this case, a letter. And it actually does a really good job of identifying specific letters, but the problem is that it fails when the letter is not connected, such as the letter I or the letter J, where there is a specific disconnect between them. So we actually ended up using OCR because it's way better at actually reading word by word and identifying the letters within each of those words. So now that we have the actual location of the letters, we have to classify each of those. And so we tried three different methods. The first one, feature extraction with the use of a letter recognition data set by David Slate. Second one was a CNN that used the extended IMNIS dataset, and the third one was the OCRs identifying the characters also.
On one of our methods at classifying letters, we used feature extraction, in where we used a Kaggle database called Letter Recognition by David Slate. In this, we tried two different strategies using SVMs and random forest on 16 features from an image that were extracted to identify the letter in the image. Uh, the 16 features are shown in the bottom image between 2 and 17, and with the first displaying what the letter actually represents. Both of the results to this method turned out to be pretty good, with the SVM turning out to be an 86% percent chance of guessing the correct letter, and the random forest predicting a 96% chance to be the correct letter. The SVM, we use an RBF function to optimize the the model, and in the random forest we used 100 trees to optimize the model. We did not end up using this in our final product because we were unable to fit this to real world data due to the fact of we didn't know how to normalize it correctly to where it fit our real world images. Another attempt we had on classifying letters was using CNNs. In We decided to use a CNN on the extended MNIST dataset. In our model architecture, we included convolutional layers, pooling layers, fully connected layers, and softmax layers. We trained the model using Adams Optimizer and 100 ePacks with a mini batch size of 128. By the end of the large data set, we ended up with a test accuracy of 85.6. The data set was about 80,000 data points, and the example of the training is shown on the right side of the presentation. We did not end up using this method on our final product is because the accuracy did not replicate on real world data due to, we think, differences in pictures or pictures of the letters between the data set and the real world data. On our third method of classifying letters, we use the OCR function in MATLAB This method we actually ended up using on our demo project. The OCR algorithm uses patterns to recognize techniques to match extracted features against a set of predefined template of characters. The recognized words are checked against the dictionaries to check if they are correct and check against any errors. As you can see is an example of it working with it correctly recognizing B, P, S, and O. After a letter is identified, it will pretty much automatically be put back together into its a word, and that word will pretty much automatically be put back in together into the right place in the sentence because the the words are being read from left to right, pretty much how a human reads from top to bottom, and then the letters are also being read from left to right. So that will pretty much automatically be put back together into a blob of text. After we would use we ended up using GPT 3.5 to actually separate the question from the text in the blob of text, and we didn't actually want to use the GPT or the OpenAI um, GPT 3.5 model because that ended up costing money, and we didn't want to do that. So we ended up just having to copy and paste the text into ChatGPT to actually get a response. And finally, to actually decipher whether the question is correct or incorrect, we asked GPT 3.5, or in our case ChatGPT, to decide whether the question was correct or incorrect to get our final response.
Something that we wanted to add to our project was the ability to identify different areas of input images as answer areas or neither. And what defines an answer area is something that is underlined or something that is a box. Most notably, we wanted to find underlined sections of our uh, input images. And to do this, we decided to use GoogleNet, which is a pre-trained neural network. Um, so our methodology, we input our images from the BAGS dataset, which is a dataset curated by researchers who have already created an auto-grading network. We would put it into GoogleNet and extract features from one of the first features to get features that are closely related to possible edges in our image. The layer we used was Inception-3A, and the output were feature maps of each image in the data set. Some difficulties with this. The data is unlabeled, so that made it difficult to traditionally train a CNN to identify underlying areas of an image, which caused a change in our methodology to use a CNN for feature extraction rather than to fully implement transfer learning using a CNN. And then because of this, attempted to use k-means to process the data once we extracted the features, but the results provided no extra insight. Here we have an example of an image that we extracted features from. And looking at this image, there's really nothing you can tell about it. There's really no insight to be gained from this methodology. My intuition would want to say that the noise that we're seeing on this image seems to be coming from like the image. There's like some shadow and some light on the image, and this could have caused confusion with the CNN. But its saving graces, if we look at the two circles here, it seems that the CNN did identify part of an underline, which shows that this type of methodology does hold some promise, and with further research, further tuning, and just gaining more knowledge on how to work this problem, this could be a way to identify underlines in an image. Some final thoughts on this idea of using a CNN to extract features and then identify underlines. The results shown on the last slide really provide no insight, and nor does it provide any tool we can use with this project, unfortunately. But I do believe with more time, this can, or we can solve this problem. And the solution to this will make our OCR scanning much more efficient because as of now, we're kind of looking at the whole document, but if we can identify underline areas or box areas, we can focus our OCR technique on that specific area rather than looking at the whole image itself, which will increase our efficiency and not hinder us in the long term with documents that may maybe contain a lot of words, a lot of paragraphs, a lot of questions, etc. The bags paper, which sort of inspired this idea, used two CNNs to solve this problem. So there's an extra layer of complexity that we have not modeled here. And I think for time's sake, we would, if we had more time or look to develop this more so in the future, we could implement that extra CNN. Because in the paper they use a CNN to identify like the edges of the paper, and then this next CNN was used to identify the underlines, and they work in tandem with each other. So ultimately, this will not be implemented in this project as it doesn't really help us at all. And the OCR by itself is able to identify the written words and characters. This was sort of an idea that would help increase the efficiency of our project.
Now I will show a demo to our project. In the demo, we will be displaying a database problem as shown here and attempt to decipher whether the response to the question is correct. As previously mentioned, we will be using the OCR to recognize characters, or the third approach displayed on the slides. Now, let me start running the thing so we can get the response soon. But theoretically, we would use ChatGPT 3. GPT 3.5 right after this, and use that API to get decide what the question is and answer is. But that costs money, and we don't want to spend money. So instead, we're gonna copy the recognized letter right into ChatGPT to decide that stuff. What isn't as clean, but again, we don't want to spend extra money. So I'm gonna do that right now because it finished outputting its response, and I'm gonna display the code right here. Now the code I feel is pretty accurate. I feel like it gets like 80 to or like 85% correct, and it does it well enough where you can get NLP to decipher what it means if I put this in, and it can do it so it's readably good now, and it's about the same as what it was before. Uh, Now I'm gonna split it up into a question and an answer, so it could decide, so it could later decide whether the answer is correct to the question. And it doesn't do this perfectly, but I think it does it well enough where uh, it could be answered by the next response. And then, as you see, it does think the answer is correct from this problem, which is actually correct. So yeah. Now I will be showing where the method does and does not work. The method does not work as shown in the first bullet point and first diagram when there is bad handwriting or there are diagrams. The method does not work in diagrams because there are not words in it, and our method is not made for diagrams. It's only made for actual words. And it doesn't work very well for bad handwriting because it is harder to actually recognize what those words are or where the words are, because it could uh, the words could be mixed together, or it could not be on the same line, and what could mess up the process of finding the word. Secondly, our model has struggled when the papers aren't formatted correctly because our we built our model to work in one way where the question is above the response, and as shown in the second figure, the questions are not above the response. And the reason we made it that way is because when we recognize the code, we just recognize all the words from like the way a person reads, and then puts it in the NLP, and the NLP decides what the question and answers are. So that's why differently formatted papers do not help us. During the project, we faced a lot of challenges that we had to overcome, and in this, I want to bring up four that were especially painful. First being finding data sets for letter recognition that were easy to implement and understand for obvious reasons. Second being actually implementing the data sets, and this was actually our biggest problem because, for example, for our model we made for feature extraction, we couldn't fully normalize it correctly, and it was not giving the correct outputs because of that. And also for our CNN model, we I think the image, or we think the images weren't exactly the same as in the data than the real world examples, so we couldn't fit it into into the project. The third problem we ran into is identifying the part of the paper that is the question and the part of the paper that is the answer. This was a issue because if you did this using ImageRec, you'd have to use NLP with it, and we couldn't do it in the time allotted, so we ended up just using NLP alone with while printing out all the words to the paper. And the final problem we ran into is connecting all the project back together, and this was an issue because an error in one piece of the code messes up the entire thing. Throughout the project, we recognized some things that we think we did well, and some things that we could have done better or could do better if we worked more on it. Some things that we did well are recognizing where words are in the text and recognizing where those letters are in the text. If we move on this, we can actually keep this and not need to improve on it very much because that does a pretty good job. If we were to work more on it, things that we would work on is obtaining better accuracy on the character recognition because it doesn't do that good of a job and could do way better. The second thing we could do is recognizing different parts of the text and to identify the question and the answer. With this would use some NLP with ImageRec that would be tricky, but it would be really cool if you could get this to work. Anyways, this was our project. Thank you for listening.